All right. Now that we've got the cameras working, Michael, why don't you start by telling me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am a little older than you. I've done many things. Uh, I grew up in Middle Tennessee, halfway between Knoxville and Nashville, and on a tobacco farm. Grew up in poverty. We lived in a log cabin till I was about 8 years old.
Wow.
Made our living by mules, and I didn't work behind the mules. My brother did. My twin brother did. Uh, I had polio, and so I wore special shoes and braces and things like that, and couldn't be messing up a $40 pair of shoes when the family income was less than $1,000 a year.
Wow.
So, um, so I had having polio turned out to be the best thing that happened to me. I actually realized that before I was an adult. It enabled me to go to college. I went to college on a vocational rehabilitation scholarship, or at least they started me 5 quarters at Tennessee Tech. And I got a start, and then I'd go north and work in the factories and come back to school. So that's the way I got through college. And after college, taught school and down here in the mountains as well. And when we were located about halfway between Knoxville and Nashville in Middle Tennessee, except it's up on the Kentucky line. And during college, I majored in history. Secondary education was a minor, and then got out, taught school. And while I was teaching school, I met my future wife. She was going to Bible college, and through her family, her dad mainly, I learned about Francis Schaeffer, and that changed my world.
Hmm. Interesting.
I grew up in a Methodist church, and it's very pietistic, very emphasis on ethics and holiness and things like that. But when I read Schaeffer, it was like I describe it as walking through a funnel. You know, you're in the tube, and it's back here, and I walked out the front of the funnel, and it just opened the world up. It was amazing. So that was during my senior year in college, and then I got out and taught school for a while. But Schaeffer, even though it took me 6 months to read The God Who Is There, um, it was clear there's something more interesting and much more challenging than what I had known about Christianity. So my wife and my sister, or my future wife and my sister, had gone to Bible college. So I had a degree already, and I thought I'd go work on a master's degree in a Bible college in Kansas City. Well, I got there, and they were essentially, I felt, giving me the notes that they got in graduate school 5 years, 10 years earlier. And by that time, in the interim, I'd gone to a Bible church, which was very dispensational. And I became disenchanted very quickly with reading Schaeffer, and then the separatism that was there. That just didn't work. And so I transferred to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and started doing a MDiv. They didn't, it was a master's in education, Christian education. That wasn't what I wanted. I wanted Bible content, I wanted apologetics, church history, that some meat. So I had to take the MDiv, and of course, starting the MDiv meant Greek and Hebrew. So I did the whole, really the difficult part of the MDiv, and I had to drop out. Some problems in our marriage and health problems with my wife, and I dropped out and worked in a factory for, well, it was probably about 10 years, and went
Wow.
back. They had completed um, a MAR, and working with a new MAR, I could go back and complete the complete a degree in 18 hours. So I got it tied up in a degree. And after that, I worked in industrial sales, worked at Wheaton College and in development. I was recruited by Tennessee Tech to come back south to work in their development program, actually to start a program. And I found that 2 jobs in education, while the people were great and the mission was great, the bureaucracy was unbelievable. And having worked 10 years in industrial sales for a Minneapolis company, when I was essentially working on my own, when I was a salesman, and then later I was a sales manager, and I could get things done. My boss, the sales vice president, if I couldn't get hold of him, I could actually call the president and get something done. But Tennessee Tech, I had to take 3 months to hire somebody, and I'm a bit of a driver, and so I went back into industrial sales. I found that position was going to be eliminated because we were selling equipment, industrial machinery for a German company, and the economy was turning down, and they wanted us to they wanted us to build a reserve of inventory and add people. And my boss said, "Hey, we've got 2 used equipment businesses, and we're going to concentrate on that and let the distributorship go." So I had a year to do something. And I started the Humanitas Forum on Christianity and Culture. I don't know if you got to check out my, I'm sure you read my little paragraph.
Yep.
But Sense Making is a newsletter that I have now. So I started Humanitas Forum. What does it mean to follow Jesus in a post-Christian culture? And the name Humanitas was from the question that was being asked then in bioethics. I started by an emphasis on bioethics for the first 3 years or so. Cloning and stem cell research, those were big topics in the news then. And I focused on those. And what does it mean to be human? And that's where the Humanitas come from. And I felt that it was clearly a post-Christian culture, and I wanted to decide what that meant. But when I wrote my 501c proposal for the IRS, I realized that bioethics might not be big enough to keep me going and keep the interest. And so I wrote it broadly. What does it mean to follow Jesus in a post-Christian culture? And bioethics could fall under that. And
well, when you talk about a post-Christian culture, what are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about not a culture where Christianity has disappeared, but it doesn't have a physical presence. There are no institutions in the culture that are shaped by a Christian worldview. And that's there are people who define post-Christian different ways, but that reflects the secularization of the culture. And we live in many ways through institutions and education, business, all those things. And now even more so since some of the cultural agenda is coming into our human resources departments and so forth. It's even less of an influence in institutions.
How would you differentiate between a secular institution and a Christian institution?
Well, there are many shades that can be made there. I think that there's common grace, and there is not a purely secular institution. There's a lot of good, even in education or business or whatever. So I don't try to make a distinction between a secular institution and a Christian institution. We are to be salt and light, and to bring a Christian presence wherever we're at. And so I think that we're sorry that's a discipleship problem that I wrestle with right now, is how to, and that's what I want to talk to you about, is how to do discipleship in such a way that we can train people. People are busy and don't take the time, and they look at all the issues. I'm fixing to teach a class on ancient wisdom for a postmodern age, and working with business, working with work, education, different arenas like this. And a concern that I've got is when people see the magnitude of the problem, how to scale it to where they can get something to work with, and getting an understanding of the magnitude of the problem is hard to do at an elementary level till you work people up. So that's one of the things I try to do with my sense making newsletter. Is I've got about probably 100 people who read my newsletter locally here on a regular basis, and that is a way of shaping some of those people, preparing them to think about the magnitude of the problem.
And your newsletter is michaelpoore.substack.com, that one that you sent me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so these are, I mean, part of the challenge of trying to make progress in this area is, of course, definition and scope, because it's hard, you know, I don't know if have you read Tom Holland's book, Dominion?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. Because I think in a lot of ways, the entire secular framework is born out of Christendom, out of a way to try to avoid what became sort of the very bloody and intractable conflicts of in the post-Reformation of, you know, all the wars, Catholic Protestant wars. And so this secular Protestant framework develops, especially in the United States, where even though there is no state church of the United States, especially before the Second World War, everything was sort of permeated with a self-conscious Christian, you know, to be a good person was to go to church, to broadly follow Christian values, marriage, family. I mean, this was all sort of, you know, especially before the counterculture, this was all pretty much standard assumed thinking in the United States. And churches sort of tried to intensify upon that and make the point that participating at this level of Christendom, discipleship really involved more. And so churches usually sort of tried to intensify, but there was already certainly an alignment to the culture. And part of what we see, and I think Schaeffer tried to demonstrate the continuity in Christianity then in the culture. And then, of course, the counterculture comes along, and, you know, in the 1980s, when Schaeffer really comes to public prominence, it's sort of a pushback against the 1960s, 1970s counterculture, and the attempt to de-Christianize institutions. So, and, you know, usually for an ostensibly pluralist vision that would imagine that good is somehow self-evident in the world, and then, you know, all the different religions sort of pursue the good as such, et cetera, et cetera. And that project has now been with us a while, and I think amongst many, they look at the culture and say that de-racification, that loss of connection to the roots, has meant that these institutions have just sort of continued to float away and increasingly get further from what had been implicit Christian values, practices, and norms. And so, even though there's a continuity with Christianity, they sort of float away.
It's been referred to as a cut flower civilization.
That's a good way to say it. It's a good image to sort of conceptualize it. So how does your project, I mean, especially when I hear discipleship in, over the last 30, 40 years, there's been a real, Dallas Willard went into this. There was a real discipleship focus in many churches to try to, in a sense, reattach the cut flower in some ways.
Yeah.
So talk to me about this project a little bit more. I'm just trying to see if you and I are tracking kind of on the same page with this.
Okay. I work on the campus of Tennessee Tech with students.
Okay.
And the Humanitas Forum is a public organization. I work about half time with students and about half time with just general people in the public, discipling a doctor, an elder in another church. I've been asked to mentor him, all sorts of things like that. A lot of church problems. I've been called in to do mediation in church problems. So a lot of it's on the ground. I'm not a pastor. I'm not ordained as a pastor, but a lot of it is pastoral work. And I have pastors that a couple pastors that I've discipled in many ways, I think. But what I try to do is help people to understand the culture, what the challenges of the culture are, and then how do we contend for the faith? And that's my apologetics interest. Ratio Christi is a campus ministry of apologetics, and try to get beyond just the arguments for the existence of God, get beyond the argument whether the Bible is reliable and so forth, to a cultural apologetic and how to live out. First of all, to think that there could be a theology of work and what that means. And I've developed a pretty substantial library overall and quite a few books on a theology of work, and do Sunday school classes or in mentoring people, talk to them about a theology of work. And that needs to be expanded until we are thinking theologically about education and technology, especially with the college students that I work with. Pornography is a big issue. So in this class I'm doing on I'm looking at the Old Testament, the wisdom literature, and picking up themes that will address specific areas. So, for example, when I talk about the strange woman of Proverbs, I make the point that she's no longer a woman. She's pixels on a screen, or she's silicon in a sex bot. So translate those concepts of distorted sex into the realities that are in the culture today. And I use secular people as much as I can to make my points. Louise Perry, for example, you're familiar with her?
Yep.
So I make a case for dealing with the sexual revolution based on some of the arguments she makes. Deborah So is another lady. She argues that biology is important. So I think we can draw on those people and some common ground that we have there, what Schaeffer would call, to a certain degree, co-belligerence. And we can draw on that as an aspect of common grace. And people who either, well, and another thing, I find that most people don't know, at least in the churches in the area that I minister in, common grace, natural law, all of those things. And that's an important part of what I'm trying to do, is help them to see that even in the fallenness and the separateness of religion, Christianity from the culture, that Tom Holland is correct. There's a residual there. And whether they know it or not, that's something that we can connect to and be a resource and provide a common ground for talking about things. A lot of the church identifies themselves not only, now this is true in my area, identify themselves as we are not like them. And instead of building common ground, and in fact, what a part of what I've done is something like your estuary, except it's within the church. I've had reading groups for several years, and I've tried to get many different congregations in those groups. They're typically 8, 10, 15 people. And I guess probably I've had those for 10 or 12 years. And I'll have Free Will Baptist, Southern Baptist, PCA, OP, and so forth. And the mix varies from time to time, but it's that thrust to building common ground within the church, and then how to reach out and talk to other people. And most people, at least in this area, will have an agenda. When they talk with someone, they feel that they have to witness to them, to evangelize them, convert them, instead of building common ground and answering questions. That's one of the things I learned from Schaeffer is, there's a story. He said if he had an hour to talk to somebody, he'd listen for 55 minutes and give answers the last 5.
Yeah.
Now it's hyperbole, but he's
not always.
no. In fact, I've heard people. I went to hear him speak at Wheaton College once when we were still in the Chicago area, and there was some guy there that was belaboring a point. But James Sire told the story that there was some guy who had communications problem, and he couldn't make himself clear, and Schaeffer kept helping him try to get the answer out, and the audience really got frustrated. So maybe it makes a point. Listen and then answer.
What kinds of books are you using for these church reading groups?
Oh, everything. I think we've used Dallas Willard. You had mentioned him. He's not. I'm reformed in the sense of being an evangelical, reformed evangelical. It's I've attended a PCA church. I go to a Southern Baptist church at the moment. We've used Jamie Smith, Os Guinness, a broad range of people like that.
What does your program with the students look like? How often do you meet with them? What kinds of things are you doing with them?
We meet twice a week, and then a lot of one-on-one. Meet on Thursday nights on campus, and we're currently just finishing 3 isms: nihilism, existentialism, and absurdism, and reflecting what that looks like in the culture. So for the nihilism discussion, we had an essay by a Harvard student who argued that Harvard students are nihilists. And so we used that as a way of talking about that. Last week we were on existentialism, and this Thursday will be absurdism. And there are some philosophers who would consider themselves absurdist, and we'll be looking at a couple of those.
Do you meet as how large of a group are these meetings?
It's usually a small group. It's self-selecting. The questions are pretty heavy, and occasionally I'll have a campus minister send another campus ministry send somebody over since they're struggling with something that they don't know anything about. Now, I'm not a professional apologist. I wasn't trained in apologetics or philosophy, but it's something I've had to pick up over we've had this Ratio Christi ministry for, since 2015.
Okay.
So I've accumulated a good library and a lot of, learned a lot about apologetics over that time. We bring in speakers. We have Kelly Kapic coming in to speak on his book, You're Only Human. So we do that. And the other thing you ask about, the the weekly schedule, we eat dinner on Sunday night, and that's a time of discussion. My son and my daughter have had contact with the Southborough Labrie, and have gone out there, and so we've tried to adapt some of their dinner conversations to our Ratio Christi meeting. So building a community there. So we'll pick up a topic for discussion. Sometimes, if we've got a speaker, we'll do a follow-up debrief for the speaker. So it's a time of building community, and is many ways much more productive than the formal study on Thursday night.
That doesn't surprise me. What tell me about some of the students that come to these things, their background, their interests, what motivates them?
A lot of them are they're curious about apologetics. They've not had apologetics at all. Many of them don't even know the meaning of the term apologetics, and they're just a little bit curious. Some of them have problems. We're working with a guy now who's dealing with the question of the hiddenness of God, and we've been working with him for 2 years, and we're working through some things. He comes from a PCA background, so he's got a family history of good teaching and everything, but I don't think anybody really sorted out for him what it means on the ground. It's head knowledge and how to live it out. And he was in a bubble, and when you go to college and other people ask questions that you never thought about, it's pretty easy to get rattled. So I'm spending a lot of time with him. In fact, our assignment, the topics that we're dealing with this semester are a range of questions that came up last semester, and I've assigned him to do that topic, the hiddenness of God. So he'll be dealing Schellenberg or some of those folks who've written on the hiddenness of God. He deals with those.
Okay.
A lot of them are, and we don't. My daughter Jennifer works with me. She's an unmarried music teacher, and we've just had 2 meetings sitting down, the 2 of us, to talk about the audience that we've got. A number of the people this semester are they're socially awkward. We got 2 or 3 people who have ADHD. All of them are smart. Mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, those kind of people. And they're capable, but very reluctant to talk. And it's an anomaly. We've never had this combination. You always get a few people like that.
Right.
This time, that's one of the things we're trying to sort out, is how to, and it's what that does is that means a lot more one-on-one, because you got to get to know those people. And understand what their questions are. We've had a Buddhist student attending this semester, an Iranian who came to do at Tennessee Tech, came to do a PhD in chemical engineering. So we're getting some people that are non-Christians. It's typically a Christian group.
Okay. That's very interesting. I think a lot of people are dealing with the fact that rates of autism have risen, and I think COVID also disrupted a lot of young people's development, especially in the relational, social. To have a year or so, I mean, screens have already been disrupted, but then you throw a pandemic on top of that, and the social isolation, you throw the higher rates of autism, the more awareness of how being on an autistic spectrum impacts someone's relational capacity. I'm not, especially at a technical school that tends to attract the sciences, I'm not surprised you're seeing more and more students that are struggling in some of these areas, even though they're excelling in technical fields. I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah. I think we did a count, and we've got 9 people who have either ADHD on Ritalin or something like that, or have social skills problems.
Yeah, I'm not
That's,
surprised.
and that's created a lot of work because you have to do more work on one-on-one.
Oh yes, it creates, I mean, a
Oh yeah.
lot of the you have to, sort of give support in terms of their capacity to benefit from the, if it's a small group, it's a people who are really adept relationally and socially, that they're like a fish in water. But if you struggle in that area, small groups can be really challenging, sort of all the implicit knowledge of knowing when to speak, how to relate. So no, I can really see that that's a complexity for you guys.
I think too, since it is a small group, people will come to our group and they don't want to go to a group that's 80 or 100.
Yes, yes.
They can
Yeah,
fit in, and especially come to eat a home cooked meal once a week. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Especially when they're away at school, living in a very institutional life. That's really a powerful thing, to be much more in a familial, warm, welcoming home environment is very powerful for a lot of students. Um, how on earth did you find me?
I found you back a long time ago, way back when you were first, I don't remember exactly how, when you were talking about Jordan Peterson. I think that was, um, I was trying to think, I don't think it was a Jordan Peterson link. I think it was some other topic I was searching, doing an internet search for, and you had written something on it. And I picked up your name, and then later, maybe a couple of years ago, I mentioned to my daughter that this guy Paul Vanderclay, you need to check him out, and she's become an avid fan of
Oh,
yours. She'll check you out once a week, twice a week,
okay.
almost, maybe even daily. You'd have to ask her, but she's always sending me a note. Have you seen Paul's latest and so forth? And she and I both uh, cover a pretty broad spectrum. Glenn Scrivener, we watch trigonometry, Benjamin Boyce. Uh, these are ways of finding out what some of the issues are in the culture and finding out. My basic thrust in this Sunday school class I've mentioned is to describe a mission field. What do we do in this mission field?
Yeah, yeah,
And describe that in such a way that people can understand it and relate to.
yeah,
I see myself as a translator. Um, I'm not a scholar, but I like reading books. I've read Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Václav Havel and people like that. I like that. I'm not a scholar, but you can learn things from those people that help you understand what's going on, and then how to explain that then to the culture. Um, Tom Holland he's a godsend,
yeah, yeah.
and
No, I agree.
yeah.
Tell me, I was very interested in your missional question. What does it mean to follow Jesus in a post-Christian culture? Can you dig into that a little more, especially as you're seeing your students and even the other adults wrestle with that? Because I think, I think in many ways that is the question that the church is confronted with. Because as I said, especially people closer to our age, we grew up in an area, again, of, Aaron Renn calls it sort of a positive world. There's a degree of alignment between the culture and Christianity. And in the last, well, during my lifetime, that's shifted quite a bit. It doesn't shift evenly throughout. I mean, the
Oh,
United States and the West is a very large place. And so it shifts in different ways. But this, figuring out what it means to embody Christianity, not just, at all the different levels, individually, familially, as a church, and then when you get up into these institutions. I mean, these are some of the most difficult things that we're struggling with right now.
Yeah.
So what are some of your takeaways from doing this work for a while?
My takeaway, first of all, is that people don't understand the culture. They're very busy, and they don't have time to process these things. They are looking basically for a formula to keep their kids at home, keep their kids, I shouldn't say at home, but keep their kids in the faith. And they're looking for shortcuts, a formula. And that for the adults is the big challenge, is you got to carve out time for, like Deuteronomy says, walking, when you walk in the streets, when you do your daily life. You got competition from social media, of course. How do we understand social media? And I did a series of apologetics classes at a local church here, and when I did the segment on social media, parents, and these are teenagers, they couldn't imagine telling their kids that they have to wait till 14 or 16 to get a phone.
Yeah. Oh, my wife is an elementary school teacher, and she just gets very frustrated because she's telling the parents very directly, do not introduce these things into your children's lives. To the degree that you can, keep them away for as long as you can, because this is really going to undercut the basic formation. And she's teaching in a public school. This is going to undercut your children's development, and it's going to introduce all sorts of corrosive distractions into their lives that they are going to then be encumbered by once they get sort of into the college, young adult phase, because they're not developing the interpersonal social skills that they really need for thriving long term.
Yeah, and it affects their attention span quite dramatically as well.
Yeah.
There's a guy, Leonard Sachs, SAX, who has done considerable research. I think he may be a Christian of some sort, but he has good information. My concern is that I'm a generalist, and I wonder if I shouldn't be more of a specialist in some particular area, specializing in technology, or because that is the big thing that's shaping people right now.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of going off to school as I did and getting warned, don't be careful in the biology class, you'll lose your faith. They'll teach you about evolution.
Yeah.
It's just on the internet, and the distraction of it is much of a problem as the content. So we have to understand technology is it giveth and it taketh away, someone said.
Yeah.
And discernment, wisdom. That's why I'm interested. I'm doing this series at Sunday school. About 3 years ago, I did a study of Proverbs verse by verse with an atheist student, and he got interested in Proverbs because he wanted to learn to live wisely.
Yeah.
And he moved out of the area after we got through the series, but the wisdom that comes in making decisions between good and bad. And I think we have to mine and this is my kick right now, wisdom literature, discernment.
Yeah.
You got good and bad, and how do you disciple to where people can understand one versus the other, and then be formed so that they can engage with the difficult parts and not get sucked in.
Yeah. And wisdom, it's interesting how wisdom has become an area, in YouTube. There are a lot of secular channels out there now.
I noticed this 2 or 3 years ago, and I got to thinking, and it's taken me this long to get to doing something of substance on that, but it's the secular people are asking the questions.
Yes.
That's part of the value of knowing the culture, because there are people out there who see the culture, they know what's going on. John Vervaeke,
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
You can learn to read the culture by listening to the culture.
Yeah. 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 But it's also, as you well know, it's something that you want. You need a degree of maturity and stability to engage in it, so you don't just get swept away. It's tremendously difficult.
Oh, and parents are a problem. You find children, you find children who are frustrated with the parents from being on the phone. So it starts with the adults.
Yeah. 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 Kids parents model kids grow up into their parents. That's sort of the first draft of who they are.
Yeah.
And part of what's so difficult is that you've got parents who are sort of formed by a particular technological layer, and then kids are living at a different layer. Kids know social media. They've long outstripped the parents, because they've sort of, the parents have, they live busy lives, they've got to pay bills, they've got to keep the household, and so they sort of plateau at a certain level, and kids go to a different level. And then not only are the parents in some senses modeling bad behavior to the kids, but they are also obsolete in terms of having no idea. I regularly have that. I will, someone will bring something to me that's out there in the broader culture, and I'm just aghast. The culture is so vast, so large. There are so many niches. It's no one can keep up with this, and so then trying to, I think actually we do need generalists too. Trying to gain some perspective, and the hope of wisdom is that it will translate into different areas and not just be siloed by its roots.
The culture isn't out there. It's
Right.
in here.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. Well, we just have a few minutes left. I don't know if you had any specific questions you wanted to get into, or
If you now your congregation is older, I
yep,
understand,
yep.
and I wonder how you deal with some of these issues, or do you directly, since you don't have a young congregation and children growing up in your church and so forth.
Most of the people in my church couldn't find pornography if they wanted to.
Yeah,
So, so my ministry is obviously, with YouTube, taken a very strange turn,
yeah, yeah. I
in
realize
that
that.
the in terms of the church work, I'm predominantly dealing with seniors.
Yeah,
In terms of the online work, which has also via the meetups and the Estuary Project become a face-to-face, usually with adults. Most of the Estuary people, they usually have to get a little bit out of college before they begin to realize exactly what they're facing. And now suddenly, when they get into their 20s and 30s, they begin to recognize, oh man, marriage is a challenge, work is a challenge, these issues are challenging, and they come to the Estuary to at least have a forum that's a little bit separate from their jobs. To a lot of people come to the Estuary meetings and have to talk about what they're discovering at their jobs, and they need a space to process some of these things. And so for me, having a I know that there's there's a lot of debate within the estuary communities about, is this evangelism, is this not evangelism? And my take is, it's not direct evangelism, but I think churches want to be in the room for those conversations.
Yeah.
And because those conversations are going to happen. And I think part of it is, as you say, the church doing some cultural exegesis to figure out what's going on in the culture. Because if you're just learning about the culture through screens, that's only half the story.
Yeah.
Because people are watching screens, and the screens are certainly impacting them, but the group of people that are on the screens, even with social media, which has vastly broadened it, the group of people that are on the screens are small compared to the massive diversity of ideas and positions and experiences and backgrounds that you'll find just sort of dipping a sample into the culture. And so, these conversations that I do, these Randall's conversations, I think are demonstrate that, where, like with you today, I just open up Calendly and anybody can get a slot, and bang, here's a whole nother world that I knew nothing about, but here it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's tremendously challenging.
Are there resources or that you're aware of people trying to do what I'm doing? I just made a list here: art, law, education, business, family, community. Those are areas that I'm very concerned about.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do you get the church? Because they build friends and it becomes a little club. And how do you get them to move beyond that?
And the church program, which, I mean, anybody can watch what I do on Sunday. I work the church program on Sunday. I have my Sunday school class. I have my sermons. I'm not recommending that we lay aside the church program, which is attempting to form people in the scriptures and in the tradition of Christian discipleship. I'm not saying that aside, but you're exactly right that when it comes to their daily lives, the challenges of family, child rearing, all of these things, well, that's part of the reason there's so much other parachurch, so many other things going on. And you're working off the legacy of Francis Schaeffer and the work that he did. There are many other groups that are working in this area, especially around campus ministry. But I think the assumption used to be that this sort of stuff could have been segmented off at campus ministry. And I think what we're realizing is that something like we do in campus ministry needs to continue on in the churches as well.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds like I'm not at all surprised that you've both got one leg in campus ministry, which tends to be sort of the weather forecasting of what the church is going to face as we go into the future. And you've got a foot in both spaces. I'm not surprised by that at all.
No. Do you know of anyone doing something very similar? I'm aware of campus ministries, lots of them.
Yeah.
And they're working with students.
Yeah.
They're working on Bible content. They're working on theology. But then how to translate that? How to put legs under that?
I think denominations probably should be doing more of that, but denominations are really struggling. I know mine is.
Yeah, well, I just left a PCA church a year and a half ago, and I'm in a Southern Baptist church now.
Yeah.
And both of them are struggling, as you know.
Yeah. Denominations, in many ways, almost all denominations, at least Protestant denominations, sort of grow out of past fights, traumas, and schisms. And those fights, traumas, and schisms often sort of set the program of the denomination. And so then when, part of what's happened in the evangelical space is that denominations have tried to do things, but there's this whole parachurch world that has been more responsive, but also more diverse, because denominations really struggle kind of getting beyond the traumas that shaped and formed them. Because usually what denominations are about are fighting the war that formed the denomination.
Yeah. They're stuck in the past.
Yeah. And because they're so broad and inherently political, and I don't mean involved in secular politics, I mean just the dynamics are political within a denomination, because it's a process to sort of figure out your power hierarchies and your structures and your influences. I'm not surprised that a lot of other ways to assist and inform the church have developed outside of denominations. So yeah, and part of what we know now, via social media, is that we can begin to see people who are working in similar areas, but boy, it's still challenging.
In my area, and I pretty much consider myself a pioneer.
Yeah.
And I'm getting close to 20 years in this project.
Yeah.
And I've accomplished something in that I've got a newsletter that 100 people read.
Yeah.
There's momentum there.
Yeah.
And I consider it a blessing that I've accomplished what I have. Yeah. And I think it's a matter of being satisfied with that.
Yeah. Very much so. And
being content. Contentment is one of my classes for Proverbs. And that's a lesson I'm trying to learn now. Yeah. And find resources that can help me do a better job in what I'm doing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, I'm certainly with you on that.
And I think the best thing I did was forming that question, a mission question rather than a mission statement. Because I'm constantly, when I look at that, every time I'm interrogating myself.
Yep.
What do I need to be doing? Instead of saying, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. Well, I'll put your link to your newsletter, your Substack, in the notes here, so people can find you. And any other ways that you'd like people to reach out and find you? I assume you're okay with me posting this.
Oh yeah. Posting the discussion.
Yeah, this conversation.
Oh.
Or would you rather I hold it? Would you rather review it first?
I've never done anything like this before. I'm camera shy.
Well, I will send you the link and you look at it and think about it. And if you're okay with me sharing it, I'll share it. How's that?
Oh, that would, yeah, I'd be happy with that.
And if you want to keep it to you, if you want to not share it, that's totally okay too.
Oh, I didn't think there would be anything worth sharing in it.
Oh no, I thought this was wonderful. I thought this was, I think people would enjoy watching this and learning about what you're doing and thinking about it. I mean, that's
well, I'll make a deal with you. If you'll send me the link and I can preview it and let my daughter Jennifer preview it as well, we'll get her approval and go from there.
That sounds like a great plan. That sounds like a great plan.
Okay. Well,
thank you so much, Michael. This has been a joy.
And one of the reasons I want to talk to you is to thank you for what you've done. I don't think there's an estuary that I can be involved in here. I may not have time to, but my reading group has been an estuary in a sense.
Yes.
And I've lectured in a coffee shop, bringing different denominations together, at least trying to get the church to talk together before they can talk to other people outside.
Yeah.
And so I have a sympathy for what you're doing, and I pray for you and ask that God will bless you in your work. So thank you very much for the conversation and all that you've done.
Well, thank you. And yeah, your prayers, that's the most important thing you can do for me. So I very much appreciate it.
Yeah. No.
Well, thank you, Michael.
All right. Thank you.
I will send this to you.
Okay. And we'll look for and get approval from Jennifer.
Sounds great. All right. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.